I'm going to tell you something that really happened to me. Not a parable, not a dramatization. I lived this in Chicago, and the scars are mine, even if the names here are changed to spare people who still don't deserve sparing. Mom, stay out of the business. Jason said it across our walnut boardroom table on the 39th floor at 300 North LaSalle, the Chicago River glinting behind him like a blade. He said it with the brass gavel right under his hand, and the agenda printouts fanned like white flags no one was going to wave. We were gathered for the quarterly review, directors in navy suits, the outside counsel in a crisp charcoal, my CFO with the world's most expensive pen. And in one breath, my son tried to cut me from the company I'd helped build with his father. The mugs still steamed on their coasters, the window washers drifted past like divers, and the betrayal, my own child's, rang against the glass. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. When my husband John and I started Moran Logistics, back then just a single leased Kenworth out of Elk Grove Village, with me doing invoices on our kitchen table in Albany Park, we thought we were building a life our son would step into like a well-fitted suit. We hauled corrugate and palletized produce first, then specialty packaging and medical device components, then high-margin just-in-time runs for plants in Cicero and Bedford Park. I wrote our first safety manual in the dining room, bought our second trailer out of a farm auction in Joliet, and learned the rhythms of the interstate by the way John's shoulders felt when he came home. Tight on bad weeks, light as paper when the numbers were good. By the time Jason graduated from Northwestern with a minor in entrepreneurial studies and an attitude that came with a sticker price, we had a dispatch office in Elk Grove, a second yard in Hammond, a group health plan, and a skybox lease at the United Center. I never asked for but learned to use when we needed to charm clients with a skyline view. John passed 2 years later, very suddenly, in a quiet morning, with a crossword half filled and the Sun Times folded like a tent. It was the worst day of my life. It was also when I realized grief can be sharpened into resolve. I stepped in as president and chair. Our drivers knew me by name. The union rep from Local 710 would call my cell when a rumor started with the freight. Our insurers knew I read every endorsement. I was 62, gray-haired, and shorter than everyone in the boardroom, and I was the scariest person at Moran Logistics because I remembered every number that mattered. Jason joined after a couple years in consulting, which I put in quotes because it seemed to mean traveling to Austin and posting photos of smoked brisket. He was handsome, like his father, but where John's quiet competence made people lean in, Jason's confidence pushed them back a step. He called me Elaine in front of the staff once, then laughed it off as professional boundaries. He wanted to modernize, which meant a software subscription that cost more than 3 drivers' annual raises, and a marketing firm that taught him how to sit on stools for videos and say supply chain disruption like he'd invented the phrase. I let him try some things. Letting him was easy, because I wanted to be the kind of mother who believed her son was the future, and I was the foundation. I still drove to our Elk Grove yard twice a week, parked by the chain-link fence, and walked the rows of trailers with a clipboard, dates, and unit numbers like beads in my hand. I remembered our first driver, Luis, and the way he taught me to read a truck the way you read a person. The small rattles, the heat off the brake drums, the smell that said someone pushed too far. A business talks if you listen long enough. It tells you who wants to help you and who wants to take something from you. The taking started small. I saw invoices from a company I hadn't approved, Armitage Strategic, billed under process optimization. 23,000 here, 14 there. The engagement letter, unsigned by me, mentioned an efficiency report for board presentation. When I asked Whitaker, our CFO, he gave me that placid smile he probably practiced in glass reflections. Jason's initiative, he said. Quick wins, nothing strategic exposure-wise. My phone buzzed. A driver had had his hours shorted 2 weeks in a row after a software patch. We fixed it. The edge of the blade caught light I didn't yet admit was there. I don't want to paint myself as a saint. I snapped at people sometimes. I kept a list in my desk drawer at 300 North LaSalle titled Questions That Make People Lie, because you have to ask the line managers the right things if you don't want three versions of the same excuse. I expected a level of performance that makes you unpopular and keeps the lights on, but I also learned, in the bleak fluorescent months after John died, that the people who build a business with you will forgive you almost anything if you show up when it's ugly. That's why the board trusted me. That's why the vendors answered my call at 9:30 p.m. in January when the de-icer pumps froze at the yard. That's why the bank, and this is important, gave us a covenant package that required board approval for any major financing changes. Jason's hook into the board came through growth. He took Rowan Blake, a partner from an Ohio private equity group called Cuyahoga Capital, to dinner at Gibson's Italia, where they serve steaks so big the leftovers look like a second meal. He posted the river view on his Instagram, and Marla, our general counsel, sent me a screenshot with a raised eyebrow emoji. I usually don't speak emoji, but that one I understood. I invited Rowan to my office for coffee the next week, in daylight, with flags of contracts on my desk and the skyline clear through the windows. He had the kind of hairline men buy at 40 and the unblinking courtesy of a surgeon. We love founder-led Midwestern, he said. We love heavy asset businesses with service stickiness. We're not trying to flip. We're partnership capital. If he'd been a driver, I'd have told him to pull into Bay 4 and let me look at the DOT inspection stickers. But in a suit, you ask for diligence lists and watch the verbs. The verbs were off. Transition, succession, streamline, unlock. The verbs they used when they actually meant take. So I wasn't blindsided, let me be honest. I was insulted. A week before the board meeting, Jason called what he termed an executive strategy pre-brief at the Langham, in a corner of travel where you can see the river bend and the old IBM building sulk like a brick. He invited me and Whitaker and Marla. He showed up late with Rowan. I had the smoked salmon tartine, because if you're going to be handled, you might as well order something that makes your hands smell like a lake. Jason slid a stack of bound decks across the table. The cover read, Moran Logistics, Phase Change. Someone had paid for the typography. We want to talk about Mom stepping back to a more emeritus role, Jason said, like he was offering me a hammock. You've done amazing. Now it's time for bandwidth, different energy. I still work the yard on Wednesdays, I said, mostly to myself. I still carry the ICC number and the DOT number in my head. Our Illinois registration renews in March. You always will, Jason said, his smile doing that stretch it does when he's selling. But there's governance, optics, and we've had some concerns flagged by Armitage around decision velocity. Rowan added, smooth as refrigerated butter. We want your wisdom in strategic moments, Elaine, but day to day, the market rewards speed. Marla watched me, and I think she read something in my eyes because she sent me a text under the table. We can out-procedural this. I didn't look. I watched the river and felt the current I had lived in all these years shift in a way that said there's debris coming you don't see yet. I don't like melodrama, but there are moments when a room tilts. The boardroom at 300 North LaSalle tilted the morning Jason told me to stay out of the business, and I steadied myself against that walnut table and measured the distance between executive strategy pre-brief and, Mom, you're off the field. There's a particular humiliation when your blood tells you you're obsolete. It is hot and cold at once, like holding an ice pack on a sunburn. He was careful to couch it as respect. You deserve to rest, he said. The company needs to show the market we're not personality dependent. Then he nodded at Whitaker for the next slide, which showed my face, under the heading, Legacy Risk. I did not raise my voice. I asked for the motion to be read in full, and I asked Marla to confirm whether our bylaws required notice of any leadership vote on a quarterly agenda. Rowan's eyes moved like he was playing Praetorian chess. Jason said we were simply opening a discussion. We'll schedule a special meeting to formalize, Quill, he promised. But the thing about men who want to take is they prefer taking all at once. The next 48 hours proved that. Our vendor in Cicero called because someone had asked for the termination terms on our dock management contract. One of our line supervisors at the Elk Grove yard told me a guy from Armitage had walked the floor with a clipboard asking which drivers were change resistant. And a loan officer at the bank, who had been with us since the days I used to bring in a sheet cake at closing, emailed me to confirm we were updating our debt package. He attached a draft consent I had never seen that would allow a new line of credit on terms that would have let a lender pull a lever if I sneezed. I went to the yard. If you've never stood in the wind-whipped emptiness of a truck yard on a March night in Illinois, after the sun punches out and the sky turns steel, you might not understand why I chose that place to think. Concrete absorbs stories the way a quilt does. You can hear the whispers of deals made in the cabs, confessions offered to the steering wheel, songs sung to stay awake on the Stevenson at 2 a.m. I walked rows and smelled diesel and past mistakes. Luis had retired by then, but sometimes I heard his advice in the clink of a chain or the hiss of airlines. Check the small valves before the big ones, he'd say, or else you'll mistake a pinhole for a blowout. I started checking the small valves. Whitaker's expense reports had a rhythm to them. Thursdays were always heavy. Flights to Cleveland, dinners at RPM Steak, a car service on a day he was supposedly in Downers Grove negotiating a revised maintenance schedule. I had Marla pull the Armitage contract. It was templated and lazy, with indemnities that made my skin crawl. I went through my own email like an archaeologist, brushing sand off pottery shards I'd seen before but hadn't recognized as a pattern, a string of messages between Jason and a junior at the bank, CCing Rowan, subject lines like term flexibility and board refresh. Refresh, like I was a web page hanging. I slept at the Peninsula that night, not because I needed the sheets or the view, but because if I went back to Albany Park, I might sit at that same kitchen table and cry, and crying is a fine thing in private, but it wasn't going to teach me the next piece of the pattern. I ordered a club sandwich I ate half of, then I walked down to the lobby bar and sat in a corner with my notes. A pair of men took the table behind me, voices you learn to hear when you've spent your life with dispatch radios and whisper fights. They were from Cuyahoga Capital, I realized within 3 minutes, and they were talking like the deal was already done. Get the old guard to bless the transition, one said. Then you've got runway for the flip. Midcap will love it. The flip. Partnership capital, they'd said to my face. Flip, they said, when they thought the plants were decorative. I don't care how old you are. You can still feel something go young inside you when you hear the right lie. I tipped the bartender too much and went back upstairs with my notebook. I wrote 3 columns: leverage, law, and loyalty. In the leverage column, I wrote the names of every bank relationship we had and which decisions required board consent. In the law column, I wrote the sections of our bylaws I'd never even thought about in 10 years, and I wrote a note to call Aaron Levin, a litigator on LaSalle who used to help John pick jurors when he did pro bono. In the loyalty column, I wrote names that weren't on any org chart. Dispatchers who had told me the truth when it cost them, drivers who'd limped units home to save us a late fee, a foreman who once stood between me and a forklift that wouldn't stop. Then I called Marla and woke her up and said, "We're going to out-procedural this, and then we're going to out-truth it." "Elaine," she said, sleep clearing from her voice, like fog. "What did they do?" "Everything," I said, "but we're going to make them show it, and we're going to make them show it in the right room." "What room?" "The one with a courtroom seal and a clerk who doesn't care about their verbs." I slept 4 hours and dreamt of the river running backward, freight peeling itself out of containers and walking home like tired men. The morning came cold and bright. I put on my navy suit, the one I wore when I needed to remember I wasn't a widow in a kitchen, and I walked to the Daily Center under that Picasso that looks like a horse, or a nightmare, depending on how you feel. I filed for injunctive relief under 805 ILCS 5, the Illinois Business Corporation Act, on the grounds that my removal was being engineered without proper notice and in violation of our bylaws. I asked for a temporary restraining order to hold any leadership changes until we had a hearing. I attached the consent draft I'd been sent by mistake, the Armitage contract, the phase change deck, and a transcript I'd paid a kid to produce from the board meeting audio because I'd insisted on recordings 10 years ago when we switched secretaries. By noon, the clerk had given us a hearing date. By 3, I was back at 300 North LaSalle with a stack of stamped papers and the kind of anger that does math. I didn't tell Jason yet, not because I wanted to blindside him, but because I wanted to see how far he'd go if he believed I was playing the role he'd written for me. Mother, grateful, stepping back to emeritus. At 6 p.m., he texted, "Special meeting Friday, 8 a.m., full board, agenda to follow." I replied with a thumbs up and a dot, enough to be courteous, not enough to be anything else. Then I sent Marla the hearing date and told her to draft notices for all of our lenders that any consent signatures had to cross my desk, or they were void. Then I called Aaron Levin and asked him how quickly we could subpoena Armitage Strategic for their efficiency report. He asked me what I wanted people to feel when they read it. Shame, I said, and relief that they're not on the wrong side of this when it breaks. He laughed, not cruelly, but like he recognized a fellow animal that has learned that teeth are for something besides smiling. Friday came like winter comes, inevitable, even if you pretend on Thursday that the sky looks fine. The elevator doors opened on our floor, and I could see, through the glass, that someone had moved chairs. A longer table, a different orientation for the skyline. It was subtle, a lesson learned from hotels that change the angle of a bed and call it renovation, but I felt it as a trespass. Whitaker hovered near the coffee, which we had always sourced from a small roaster in Logan Square, and was decanting something from a silver thermos like he'd invented caffeine. Rowan was there, of course, and 2 new faces, a woman with an immaculate haircut and frostbitten eyes, Cuyahoga's operations lead, I guessed, and a man with a portfolio case that said, governance consultant, the way a hard hat says, "You will not argue with me about OSHA." Jason smiled when he saw me. He actually opened his arms like he expected a hug. I set my purse down and looked at the brass gavel. I touched it with one finger. "Mom," he said, the most dangerous word in the room, "let's make today easy." I smiled back at him. "I love easy days," I said. "And rules make days easy. We're about to have the easiest day we've had in months." His eyebrows moved. Jason has expressive eyebrows, and I used to tell him as a child to be careful or the wind would blow them right off. And he glanced at Rowan, who didn't blink. I stayed standing until everyone sat. Then I took the seat at the head of the table, the one with the view down LaSalle toward the river and the lake beyond it, and I placed the stamped court papers next to the agenda. "Before we begin," I said, "a small housekeeping matter. The Cook County Circuit Court has issued a temporary restraining order preventing any leadership changes until our hearing next week, so we won't be voting today." I let the words sit, like hot metal on cold snow. "Also, there are subpoenas out for Armitage's materials used in advising any of you, $50,000 penalties for noncompliance, and fees to follow." The room shifted, not tilted, shrank. People become their right size when you show them a judge's stamp. And in that moment, as the wind traced the angles of the river outside and the coffee turned lukewarm in its decanters, Jason understood that the game he was playing had referees who weren't invited to dinner at Gibson's. He didn't panic. "He's my son." He rearranged his face and he said, carefully, "We're all on the same team. This is about the company. Let's talk about the report then." He nodded at the governance man, who began to open his portfolio. I put my hand, steady, old, a hand that had written checks and held foreheads and signed union letters, on the gavel and said, "We're going to talk about the report in a second, But first, Jason, tell everyone what you emailed to the bank last Tuesday about the leadership refresh." He glanced at Rowan. "Don't look at him," I said. "He isn't family. He can be excused if he'd like to be." Rowan didn't move. Of course he didn't. Predators don't leave the watering hole because someone brought a rifle. They wait to see who can shoot straight. I slid a printed email across the table. The subject line read, in Jason's favorite jargon, "Downside Protected Facility for Post-Transition." I let the directors read. I watched their eyes, because eyes tell you who wants to help you and who wants to take. "Elaine," one of the independent directors began, tone soothing, the way men talk when they want you to believe they're worried for your blood pressure. "Let's stay constructive." "I am being constructive," I said, and I took a pen and drew 3 boxes on the corner of my notepad: leverage, law, loyalty. I checked leverage and law and left loyalty empty, on purpose, a box waiting for signatures I hadn't asked for yet. "I'm constructing the scaffold we're going to climb out of this with." I wish I could tell you I wasn't shaking. I was. I was also so calm I could taste each breath like the first sip of water after you've cried. And as I looked around that table, my company's table, where we'd mapped routes through blizzards and ordered replacement axles and celebrated drivers' new babies, I realized the real report wasn't Armitage's PowerPoint or Jason's pitch deck. It was everything I'd learned about who these people were when they thought I would go quietly. And that's when the doors opened and the receptionist stepped in, face pale, holding a courier envelope with my name on it, an envelope hand-delivered from the Daily Center, stamped again, thicker than before, and in that instant I knew whatever was inside would either save me or bury me, and either way the boy who'd once fallen asleep on John's chest in our Albany Park living room was about to see what his mother looked like when someone tried to take the last thing her husband left her. And I didn't yet know which side of me he'd fear more, the mother or the chair I was about to become. The envelope was heavier than a letter and thinner than a book, the weight of a decision. The receptionist's hand trembled as she handed it to me. On the front, in blocky clerk's script, was my name and the case number. I slid it open with my nail and felt the room lean toward me, as if every suit and coffee mug and polished shoe were answering a small gravity I suddenly owned. The first page was the TRO again, granted, signed, underlined in the judge's efficient hand. But behind it, stapled and tabbed, were 2 items that made the air hum: an order for expedited discovery and a sworn affidavit by an Armitage analyst named Daniel Cho. I read the heading once and didn't need to read it again to know it was dynamite. Under penalty of perjury, Daniel described a phase change initiative coordinated by Cuyahoga Capital to remove a founder under pretext of governance modernization, secure new debt, downside protected through covenants keyed to the founder's removal, then flip the asset within 18 months. He attached emails, printed, blue bar-coded, chain of custody sealed, between himself, his Armitage boss, and a J. Moran and R. Blake coordinating language to present to a lender and pressure legacy board members to accelerate. There was a bullet point line with a number next to it, a success fee for Armitage, paid upon leadership transition, routed to a Chicago LLC. I recognized only because I had a memory for stray nouns. North Pier Advisors, which sat on a line in Whitaker's reimbursement memo 3 months ago as the recipient of a market study. I slid the affidavit onto the table so its title showed. No one breathed loud enough to hear. Whitaker set his coffee down too carefully, like it might spill guilt. "Outsiders only in for the first portion," I said, my voice calm as a refrigerator hum. "Then executive session." I nodded to the operations lead and the governance consultant. "Thank you for coming. We'll call you back if we need you." "We're advisors to the board," the governance man protested in his well-traveled baritone. "Not for executive session," I said, and I tapped the court stamp with my pen. "And not while there's an active TRO and discovery order. Counsel?" I looked to Marla. Her smile was small and winter bright. "Advisors out," she said. Any attempt to discuss these matters off record violates the order, and nobody wants that. They filed out, their polished souls whispering. Rowan stayed seated, expressionly blank. He knew he had to. Cuyahoga had a board observer seat, and he intended to observe the blood pressure in the room. Jason cleared his throat. He was so handsome, still. It hurt. Mom, Elaine, this is getting away from the point. Daniel Cho is a kid. He's trying to save his own skin. Anybody can print emails and make them look like what? I asked, and I slid the second exhibit forward, a certified transcript of a recorded call, how Daniel had convinced his boss to walk through the playbook while Daniel's phone sat on his desk on speaker, a recorder app running. The transcript read like a script from a B-movie I wouldn't finish. Founder fatigue, optics, old guard, success fee scheduled on change of control proxy. It even said flip, like a child with a new word he wanted to use. I watched the independent directors. One, a retired federal judge, took off his glasses and cleaned them, and when he put them back on, he looked at me differently. Not as the person whose grief he'd gently accommodated for years, but as a peer in a trial. Before we open the floor, I said, I want to state for the record that I'm grateful to our court for moving quickly and to my counsel for filing clean paper. We will not have a vote today on leadership. I tapped the TRO. But we can address something else, the integrity of the people who have been steering us toward a cliff. Let's cool the rhetoric, Rowan said finally. He steepled his fingers like an on-air pundit. Elaine, we admire what you built. Governance is not a cliff. It's a seatbelt. Your narrative here is going to spook lenders and staff. That's not good for anyone. Your narrative, I said, is going to spook prosecutors if they pull 3 threads. I turned to Whitaker. Tell the board what North Pier Advisors is. A boutique, market, he said, then stopped, because lying with court paper on the table is like trying to light a match in the rain. It fizzles. It is the LLC your ex-wife established last year, I said, pleasantly, because sometimes sweetness salts a wound better than salt. She filed the articles with the Secretary of State on March 4th. It is also a pass-through for fees from Armitage, which then got billed back to us as market intelligence. I know this because I still keep copies of old signatures, and the bank still likes me, and the kid you thought you charmed in their back office prefers not to be deposed as a hostile witness. Whitaker's jaw clenched. A drop of sweat traced a careful line under his ear. Jason shifted in his chair like the cushion had split under him. We're wandering into allegations, Rowan said blandly. This is why we hire advisors. You don't want to be a company that makes accusations without rigorous internal... Rowan, I said, and I felt my face go the kind of still John used to love because it meant a knot would be untied soon. You are not on my board. You are not a director. You are a guest whose hospitality has expired. While we are in executive session, you will wait in reception. If you don't, security will help you. If you return, you will stay silent unless asked a question. If you speak out of turn, you will be removed. You are not the first smooth man to find out I can be impolite. He looked to the judge on the board, measuring whether she'd back him. She didn't even raise an eyebrow. Rowan stood, graceful as a cat. We'll be in touch, he said, and I heard in his voice the soft crack of a fall that hasn't finished yet. When the door clicked, the air changed. It wasn't relief, not yet, but it was a sound like brakes engaging on an incline. Marla distributed copies of the affidavit and transcript. I gave the clerk's stamped cover page to the retired judge. Then I said the line I'd written the night before at the Peninsula, in a hand that still had a little tremor in it. This is not a family conversation. This is a fiduciary one. Jason tried to smile. Mom, he said again, softer. I wanted to bring us into the next decade. That's all. I wanted us to... He stopped, maybe because my face was not his mother's face anymore, or because the room had shifted its gravity to me. I didn't know about Whitaker, he tried. I didn't know about... He gestured uselessly at the word flip. You knew enough, I said, and I kept my voice gentle because cruelty is a cheap thrill and I could not afford it. You knew to call a lender behind the board's back and ask them to line up a covenant that would penalize us for my continued presence. You knew to sign an efficiency contract with Armitage without board approval. You knew to prepare a vote you tried to pass off as a discussion. You knew to tell me to stay out of the business I built with your father. You might not have known how many knives were in the drawer, but you pulled one. I thought it was business, he said, the word suddenly tasting like he'd never chewed it before. The judge cleared her throat. I move, she said, that we retain independent counsel to conduct an internal investigation into payments to Armitage, North Pier Advisors, and any related entities, and into any potential breach of fiduciary duty by any officer or director. Further, that Mr. Whitaker be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. I second, said another director, voice tight. All in favor? I asked, and the hands went up like wheat in the wind. Opposed? No hands. Whitaker looked like he wanted to say a sentence with no good exit. He chose to say nothing. Security escorted him out, his expensive pen still on the table, a little metaphor lying there in polished steel. Next, the judge said, we need to address management continuity. The TRO holds the status quo, but that does not answer the question of leadership confidence. Our bank partners will want a signal. She looked at me, not unkindly. I would ask the chair to consider whether she will accept a vote of confidence. My counsel will remind you, Marla said measured, that we should not violate the TRO by effecting changes. But a resolution of confidence is not a change, it is a statement of fact. Jason spoke quickly, desperate to show he could still find footing. We're going to frighten staff. Let's keep this inside. Let's not. No, I said. Sunlight. I tapped loyalty on my notebook and drew a check mark in the empty box. We tell our people the truth before someone else does. We tell the bank before the bank hears a rumor from Cuyahoga. We tell our drivers the company is not flipping them like a car. We drafted the resolution. The judge read it aloud, her voice the old music of orders and findings. Resolved. The board reaffirms confidence in Elaine Moran's leadership and her continuing role as Chair and Chief Executive Officer, pending further proceedings. The board authorizes the retention of outside counsel and forensic accountants to review the matters at issue and report findings within 30 days. We voted. Hands rose, steady now, and when they came down, even Jason's face had changed, some boyish part of him knocked out like a tooth. He did not vote. He excused himself for conflict with a gavel's tap that felt, to me, like a knuckle rapping the lid of a coffin to make sure it was shut. I did 3 things in the hour after we adjourned. First, I had Marla draft a letter to our lenders, clean, factual, with the TRO attached and the resolution. Second, I walked to dispatch. Drivers were waiting to punch out. The Elk Grove yard manager had driven in to see what the rumors were. I stood by the whiteboard where routes were scrawled and said what needed saying. We're solid. We're not selling. We had some consultants who wanted to be owners. They're gone. You will see people in suits here, and you shouldn't talk to them without Marla or me present. If you have any worry, call my cell. You all have it. They clapped. I am not a person who cries in front of staff, but my throat warmed. Luis was gone, but the boys who'd learned from boys he'd taught stood a little taller, and I felt the yard, the concrete, the chains, the airlines, all of it, let out a breath. Third, I went home, to Albany Park, to the kitchen table where I'd written our first invoice. I put the gavel next to the salt shaker. It looked right there, homely and metal, a tool among tools. My phone buzzed like a wire. Media requests. The Sun-Times wanted comment. Crane's Chicago business left a voicemail. I called the bank first. I had the senior VP on the line, and I could hear papers being straightened on his end like the sound of intention. We saw the injunction, he said. We appreciate the transparency. We will not process any consents until your matter is resolved. Also, Elaine, we checked. That draft consent didn't follow your covenant path. That's concerning. It is, I said. We're going to make it unconcerning. Over the next 2 weeks, the war became a procedure. The Daily Center hearing was a controlled burn, lawyers speaking the way they do when they're aware of microphones. Daniel Cho testified, young and pale, his hands folded as if he still didn't trust them. He confirmed the playbook. He identified emails. He described a meeting where Rowan had said, "Old guard founders are the easiest if you flatter them and scare them in the right ratio." Rowan's lawyer objected like he was at the opera, elegant and useless. The judge ordered preservation of all documents and set a schedule that made Cuyahoga's eyebrows twitch. Whitaker's separation came fast. He took his pen and a box and a lawyer, and he left with an agreement that preserved our rights against him and his ex-wife's LLC. I didn't exult. I ate a sandwich at my desk and kept my face the way it needed to be. The drivers kept driving. The yard kept its winter hum. Gossip slithered, and I killed it with emails that said what we were doing and what we weren't. Jason stayed away. He texted twice, one message that said, "Can we talk?" which I ignored, and one that said, "I'm sorry," which I read at the table at the Wiener Circle in Lincoln Park, where I had taken myself for a hot dog like a civilian after a day with lawyers. I watched people point at the judge's order, where it had been written up online, a small Chicago story under bigger ones about crime and weather. I typed, "Not now." I did not send it. I put my phone face down and finished my fries. The revenge, if that's what you want to call it, wasn't a trumpet. It was a ledger balancing. It was a box checked next to loyalty and a ballpoint thick line through flip. It was a letter from Cuyahoga's general counsel saying Rowan had resigned to pursue other opportunities. It was a notice from Armitage that they were proud to have supported Moran Logistics and would be winding down the engagement effective immediately. It was Aaron's grin when he told me the Attorney General's office had opened an inquiry into consultant fee arrangements affecting Illinois businesses. It was the look on the bank's face. Banks have faces. When the senior VP shook my hand and said, "We like boring. Be boring again." It was the boardroom the day we lifted the TRO because there was nothing left to restrain, and the retired judge called the vote herself, hard and clear. All those in favor of electing Elaine Moran as chairwoman for a term of 3 years, with renewal per bylaws. The hands went up. I counted them because it mattered to me to count them. I heard the river against the glass, the city moving around us like a machine we were small inside and essential to. I looked at the brass gavel, and I thought of John's hands, big and dry, and the way he would wipe them on his jeans before touching a delicate thing. "Madam Chairwoman," the retired judge said formally, and then she smiled just a little. "Congratulations." I didn't say thank you. I said, "Back to work." I banged the gavel once, a sound like a truck coupling clean to a trailer. 2 days later, Jason called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered on the second ring, because you can be a chair and a mother, but you have to choose which one you are second by second. He was quiet, a city behind him in the line, car horns, wind, the choreography of people going somewhere. "Mom," he said. I could see him suddenly, 4 years old, at our Albany Park window, watching snow. "Jason," I said, I thought." He stopped, then tried again. I wanted to make something of my own. I wanted to not just be John Moran's son. He laughed once, broken glass, and I turned into the kind of person Dad would fire. "You turned into the kind of person I had to fire," I said, "because accuracy is a form of mercy. You can be more than that." "I signed the separation," he said. "Marla sent it. I signed it." A breath. "I'm going to Ohio for a while. I have friends there. You don't have to call." "I know," I said. "Take care of yourself." "I'm sorry," he said, and it landed different that time. Not a performance, not a lubricant, just a small, true thing. "I'll be better next time." Be better now, I said softly, and we hung up. I wish I could tell you I did a dance in my kitchen with the gavel. I did not. I made tea. I wrote a list titled Back to Boring, and on it I wrote, renegotiate maintenance supplier without Whitaker's cousin in the chain, finalize the driver safety bonus tweak, meet with the union, repair yard bay 3-door. I scheduled a town hall for Friday at noon. I ordered bagels that weren't fancy. I told our HR manager to add therapy coverage options to our plan because I was tired of pretending work didn't feel like life sometimes. Cranes wrote a tidy piece, Founder reclaims chair after governance fight, with a photo of me looking too stern by the windows at 300 North LaSalle. The comments were forgiving, which is unusual for the internet. One said, "My uncle drove for Moran in '09. Miss Moran came to our house when he got sick." I remembered the living room. It smelled like old flowers and fear. The boy who had written the comment would have been 12 then. Maybe that was my revenge. A stranger remembering a kindness instead of a scandal. And if it all sounds neat in the telling, know this. The cuts my son gave me didn't heal into smooth skin. They stiffened. They made me a different animal. At the next board meeting, the outside counsel finished his report. No criminal referrals necessary on our end, plenty of civil pressure to keep everyone honest, and the retired judge gave me a bottle of rye from a distillery in Pilsen for private use. I thanked her and put it in my bottom drawer and didn't open it. That night I sat in the yard again, the Elk Grove wind blunt against the trailers, and I watched a new driver back into a slot beautifully. One turn, a pause, a breath, the whole rig sliding into place like it knew where it belonged. He cut the engine and sat for a second, hands loose on the wheel, enjoying the small perfection of it. When he climbed down, he saw me and started, like he might be in trouble. "That was good," I said. "Do it that way every time." "Yes, ma'am," he said, grinning like a kid. I thought of John. I thought of Jason somewhere in Ohio, seeing himself sharper without my shadow. I thought of Rowan learning what it feels like when a door you think you own shuts. I thought of Daniel Cho looking at his own face in a bathroom mirror before he sent me the first nervous email that had become an affidavit with a seal. I put my hand on the cold rail of a trailer and listened to the night breathe around the metal. People will tell you revenge is a dish best served cold. Maybe, but I think it's a ledger best kept straight. It's knowing who you are when a boy you raised tries to sell your life for a fee structure and a word like phase. It's a gavel on a table. It's a yard door repaired because you put it on a list. At the next quarterly, under a sky blue as a bruise fresher than it looks, I took my seat at the head of the table. The Chicago River gleamed like a vein, and the window washers drifted by, ropes taut, unafraid. The agenda was thin, the business strong. We opened with safety numbers and insurance renewals and allocations to maintenance. We closed with one new item, a motion, offered by the retired judge, seconded by a director who'd once doubted me, passed unanimously, to codify protections for founder leaders against sudden removal without an independent investigation and full board notice. "Governance," I said, tapping the line item, "is a seatbelt and a steering wheel. We'll use both." I brought the gavel down softly. The sound was a heartbeat. In the reflected glass for a second, I caught my face next to the skyline. Older, yes, but not a page you refresh. A book you write. When the meeting ended, people lingered, as they do when a room has been dangerous and becomes safe again. The retired judge touched my arm. "You know," she said, "the word chairwoman fits you." "I know," I said. "That's why I measured it before I wore it." I turned the gavel in my hand, feeling its weight, feeling how it pressed into my palm like a tool I'd used forever and just remembered a new use for. On my way out, I paused by the window. The river ran where it always ran, the city doing its noisy work, indifferent and dear. I thought of the first invoice I'd typed at the kitchen table and the last threatening email Jason had not sent because we taught him, at least, that some doors should stay closed. The board had voted. The chair was mine. The business was mine in the way a life is yours Only if you show up for it when it hurts. I could almost hear John's quiet approval in the hum of vents and the distant honk of a barge horn. Not applause, just a presence beside you when the load is high and the road is long. That night, alone in Albany Park, I set the gavel back by the salt and turned off the kitchen light. The house settled the way old houses do, with small pops and sighs, like bones remembering. Outside, a truck downshifted on Kedzie, a sound that still sounds like my name. The boardroom would be there in the morning. The yard would be there if I needed its wind to remind me what steel and resolve feel like on skin. I had won the kind of revenge you can take to the bank and your bed and not hate yourself for in the morning. And in the quiet between the clock ticks, I realized something that was not triumphant, not even proud, but true. There are betrayals you survive by becoming the story's ending, and there are sons you forgive by refusing to be its tragedy. I had chosen both, and when sleep finally came, it came like the road after a hard winter storm, salted, plowed, navigable if you keep your hands steady and your eyes on the next mile marker. And I slept with the window cracked to let in the city's breath, and the last thing I heard before the dark took me was a single certain sound, the soft echo of a gavel still ringing. The end.